Good afternoon, everyone. Hello from sunny Kingston, Ontario. Welcome to another free monthly webinar from Smith School of Business. My name is Meredith Dalt. I'm a business journalist here at Smith School of Business, and it is my pleasure to welcome everyone to today's webinar, How to Communicate Effectively at Work. As always, today's webinar is presented by Smith Business Insight and by Queen's Executive Education. As usual, I want to remind you of a few things. The first is that, yes, indeed, today's webinar will be recorded, and you will be automatically getting a link to that recording in your inbox within a couple of days. So keep your eyes tuned to your inbox for that. The next thing is very important because today's discussion is really going to be requiring participation from the audience. So if you want to ask a question, and I hope you will ask many questions, we have an excellent expert with us today. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Don't use the chat button. Please use the Q&A button, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. The sooner you get those questions in, the more the likelihood that they will get answered. So please ask questions and ask them often. It's now my pleasure to introduce today's special guest, Matt Reesor. Matt Reesor is an expert on professional communications and the director of the full-time MBA program at Smith School of Business. He helps emerging and established leaders present with impact as an instructor on Smith graduate programs and with Queen's Executive Education. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you very much, Meredith. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you and all the participants today. As Meredith mentioned, spring has finally sprung here in Kingston, which—
Hey, whoa, I was wearing my winter coat this morning, so—
Well, I know, I'm being a little bit loose in terms of spring, but we take what we can get. It's been a very rainy, cold April here in Kingston. At least the sun is shining, and it's supposed to be glorious over the weekend. So,
oh, good. So Matt, you're going to give a presentation, right? I'm going to step back.
Yes.
Okay, so here's what's going to happen, audience. Matt's going to take the floor. He's going to give a presentation. When he's done, I'm going to come back, and then you and I are going to chat, Matt. But what I'm hoping is going to happen, as I mentioned, is the audience is going to bombard us with amazing questions, and we are going to have such a good time. So I'll turn things over to you.
Awesome. Sounds like a great plan. And yes, please do keep the questions coming. I mean, Meredith and I are old friends. We're happy to chat, but we'd much rather make the most use of your time and answer any burning questions that you have about today's topic. And maybe it would be helpful if I just clarified a little bit. And this presentation, by the way, will be about 10 minutes. So I'm not going to be droning on university lecture style here. I just want to go over a few points to set up the rest of the conversation that we'll be having this afternoon. So what do we mean by communicate? Well, in this case, I'm not talking about interpersonal communication and conflict resolution and those sorts of things. Certainly we can talk about that if that's what you wish and desire, but my expertise lies more in how do you effectively communicate your ideas to other people? That is, how do you improve and generate really, really strong presentation skills? And sometimes when I say presentation skills, people automatically picture themselves standing in front of a room. They've got 10 people around a boardroom table or 100 people in an auditorium, whatever it might be. Yes, that is presentation skills, but effective communication at work, more often than not, we're not communicating in that way. We're just having an informal or a formal conversation one-on-one or with a small group of people. And the good news is that the principles of effective communication really are the same, regardless of whether you're standing in front of a large group of people or you're just going in to talk to your team or your boss or your client about something important. So that's a little bit of context for what we'll be talking about today. So Meredith set up the fact that we want this to be interactive and participatory. So we're going to start with a poll. Actually, I'm going to give you 2 poll questions. So the first one is this: do you feel that you can identify a good communicator when you see or hear one? I asked for the Jeopardy music before we started, but unfortunately we don't have any available. So, and I'll not sing to you, so I'll spare you that. I see the answers coming in. This is very exciting. I'm going to let Roxanne— I should mention Roxanne is supporting Meredith and I on the back end. Thank you very much to Roxanne. All right, so look at this. So we've got 75% of you feeling that you can identify a good communicator when you see or hear one. And I think that's generally true. For most of us, we feel that when we're in a room, we can tell if someone is connecting with the audience. We can tell if someone has that elusive presence or charisma. The tricky part is understanding, well, what exactly is it that they're doing that I can take on board and bring to my own presentation skills? So great, excellent. Very glad to see about 3/4 of you feeling that you can identify a good presenter when you see, or a good communicator when you see or hear one. For those of you who felt, you know what, I'm not always sure, absolutely. Because sometimes it can be really unclear. There's all these different kinds of contexts, there's different topics, there's a lot of different variables that might impact our ability to really tell whether someone is being effective or not. But glad to see that for the most part, most of you feel that, yeah, generally I can tell if someone's hitting the mark as a communicator or not. So on to the next poll question. Here it is. Do you enjoy communicating your ideas to others at work? Is this something you look forward to? Again, we're watching the answers come in. Fantastic participation today. This is wonderful. It's great to see so many people here. Thank you again for joining us. Wow, so this is interesting. So it's basically a split with most of you, I guess, some of the time at least, saying, yeah, it depends. And I guess that makes sense. There's so many, again, variables that might impact, like, what kind of situation am I in? Am I in a high anxiety situation or a low anxiety situation? And that will be different for each one of us. What gives us anxiety and what doesn't give us anxiety? And I think that's one of the first tips that I want to give you today in terms of how do you communicate effectively at work. Understand what are those triggers for you that cause you anxiety or discomfort when you're communicating your ideas to others. It might be the status of the people that you're communicating to. It might be your familiarity with the content. It might be the technology that you're using to support your presentation. It could be any number of factors, but it's really useful for us to go through an exercise and identify what kind of situations do we feel most comfortable in. So hopefully we can put ourselves in more of those kinds of situations. And similarly, if there are situations that make us feel uncomfortable, then we can do the work to understand, okay, so what is it exactly about the situation that makes me uncomfortable? And then more importantly, what steps can I take to ensure that my comfort level increases going forward? Great. So very good to hear, to get your participation here on these two poll questions and to understand a little bit about you as an audience, how you view communication generally, and particularly why you might be here today. So thank you for that. So on to the next part that I want to talk about is this idea of presence. But before we do that, I just want to go over one of my goals that I tell my students in all of my courses, all of the students that I teach, is that we really want to make the implicit explicit. So for the 75% of you who felt, yes, I can identify a good communicator when I see one, I want us to start thinking about, okay, well, what is it exactly that this person is doing? How are they using their voice? How are they using their body? How have they structured their content? How are they leveraging technology, PowerPoint, whatever they might be using in order to support their presentation or their communication? So starting to make that implicit explicit, because most of you, again, you know when you're in front of a good communicator and when you're not. So let's start identifying some of those specific things that make that person a strong communicator. In my opinion, and beyond great content, that's taken as absolutely necessary, right? You've got to have great content. So beyond great content, I believe there are three core elements that work together to achieve presence during a presentation. And presence is really that credibility that you have with your audience. If you don't have credibility with your audience, it really doesn't matter how strong your content is. It's probably going to land flat or not as strongly as it might otherwise. So we want to really get to this position where we feel that we are exhibiting presence. So what does it look like to me? Three core elements. First one is confidence. We have to appear confident in what we are saying. So this comes down to things like, again, how are we managing our voice? Are we using too many filler words? Is our pacing okay? Many of us, when we get nervous, myself included, or when I'm excited, I tend to speak really, really quickly. And that can impact the audience's perception of my confidence. It feels like I'm racing through my material. If I'm not making eye contact, that might be another thing that's impacting confidence. But I want to put a little qualifier on this word confidence. Quiet confidence. Because what we don't want is loud confidence. Because what is that? That becomes very quickly arrogance. And I think we've all been in a room where maybe someone, as the saying goes, they suck all of the air out of the room. They're very big, they're big voice, they're big hands, and there might be some contexts where that kind of communication style might work. There are parts of the United States, for example, you ever watch someone like Tony Robbins present, he is a big presence in a room. And he is all over the place. He's moving, his voice is going up and down, lots of tonal changes, all that sort of thing. But for the most part in business, at work, we want to exhibit that quiet confidence and not have overconfidence, because that can rub people the wrong way and you can actually significantly decrease your credibility. There's lots of studies that show, and we've all had that experience maybe in a sales situation where the person who is selling something to us, they just seem a bit overconfident in this product or service that they're talking about, and it turns us off. So that impacts their presence and ultimately their credibility. Enthusiasm or sincerity. I say or. For many presentations, or communications, you're going to want to show enthusiasm. You're pitching an idea to your team or your boss, for example. You're doing a product demonstration for a client. For those kinds of situations, you want to show enthusiasm. Other situations, it's not appropriate for us to be enthusiastic, but we need to be sincere. So if, for example, you're giving an apology or you're sharing bad news, it's not a time for us to be enthusiastic. We need to be sincere. So what's the qualifier for this one? Controlled enthusiasm or controlled sincerity. If our enthusiasm is not controlled, if that passion gets a little bit too high, again, it can be overwhelming for the audience and it can put them off. Similarly, if we overplay sincerity, and a good example of this is Chip Wilson, the former founder and CEO of Lululemon, very successful Canadian apparel company, as I'm sure everyone in the session today knows. I don't know if all of you remember, about 5 years ago, they had an issue with some of their yoga pants and that they were becoming transparent. And at any rate, Chip Wilson went on Bloomberg television and said some unfortunate comments about the cause of the transparency. And he basically blamed women's body shape for causing this issue. Obviously not a good thing to say at all. He was quite rightly immediately condemned for his comments. And so he made an apology video. And this is where I'm coming to controlled sincerity. In that apology video, he does say, "I'm sorry." And at one point he says, "I'm sorry, I'm really sorry." And it just comes across as it's a bit too much. The sincerity is overplayed. Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister of the UK, did the same thing, or was criticized for the same reasons in, I think it was 1997 when Princess Diana died, and his first comments on her passing were seen to be very much too maudlin, too overplayed on the sad side, and his sincerity suffered. So for presence, we need to have confidence, quiet confidence, enthusiasm or sincerity, but always controlled. And then we need to have some kind of connection with our audience. Our audience has to feel that they see us as an honest broker, that they can obviously understand us, and that they want to come along on the journey with us. So we have to build a genuine audience connection. So what are we going to do in our communications at work? And this has been so challenging over the last 2.5 years during the pandemic, for us to build genuine relationships with one another, so that when we are sharing our ideas at work, they don't appear transactional, but they're based on real foundational relationships that we share because we have a genuine connection with the audience. Similarly, if it's an audience that you're presenting to that you've never met before, again, maybe you're going out to pitch a product to a new client, what can you do to create a genuine audience connection in terms of the small talk that you engage in, maybe before your presentation, for example, the communications that you share by email or telephone or Slack or whatever before or after the presentation, always with a mind of building that genuine audience connection. Because we know that people are far more likely to be persuaded by people who they feel a similarity and a likeness towards. It's one of the key principles of persuasion. So we want to build that genuine audience connection. So it's these three things together. And then ultimately, what do we get? We get this credibility. We get credibility with our audience. And that's probably the most important thing that I can share with you today. In all the courses that I teach, and this is over 14 hours in my exec ed programs, 30 hours in the MBA program, for example, we dive really deeply into the pragmatics of how you build credibility. But I'd like for everyone to think about, when you're communicating at work, what can you do to build credibility? How can you have that quiet confidence in terms of the way that you're presenting yourself and your material? How can you make sure that you always have enthusiasm or sincerity, but in a controlled way? And how can you build that genuine audience connection? So I want to show you a brief video. I use a lot of video in all of my teaching. I think it's the best way to demonstrate concepts. I also happen to be a really big tennis fan. I'm sure everybody knows Roger Federer. So this is him on center court at Wimbledon last summer during the tournament. It was the first time they've been able to hold it for a year and a half. For those of you who don't know Roger Federer in great detail, he's one of 6 $1 billion net worth athletes in the world. He just met that number last year. You can see the Uniqlo sponsor that he has in his shirt. He quite controversially 5 years ago changed from Nike to Uniqlo as a sponsor, a very savvy deal if you want to look it up. But he's also someone who has a huge following and admiration amongst fellow players and fans. They see him as a very genuine and a very credible person. I believe he also speaks 5 languages fluently, including English. So after his match, which he has won, the tradition is that you get interviewed on center court. So here he is being interviewed on center court, and the interviewer asks him about this rather archaic English idiom about absence making the heart grow fonder. You're going to see what happens, and then I'm going to let the video run for about another minute after that, just again to show you who Roger Federer is as a communicator. So I think there's a lot of strength that he shows here.
And Roger, the final thing is it true what they say about absence making the heart grow fonder, being back here?
Sorry, I didn't understand it. I heard something absence, and then, I don't know, my mind went blank.
Is it true what they say about absence making the heart grow fonder and being back on centre court?
I don't understand that saying. My English is not good enough.
Fair enough. So basically, having missed out last year, having been away from this place for 2 years, how special is it to be back here on centre court?
Yes, there you go. A good reminder, my English is not very good, but it's
better than mine.
No, look, I think we're all very happy, all the players, I think including all the fans and the organizers and everybody, that we get a chance to play again back on tour overall, and especially here at Wimbledon, plus with the crowd. It would have been the worst to have this tournament with no fans. This would have been the absolute killer. So it's such a privilege to play here, and look, I couldn't be more excited that I made it after a long, hard road the last year and so forth. But I'm happy I get a chance for a second match, and we'll see how it goes. But I hope everybody else is having a great time, and even though it's raining, but that's normal. So I'll see you in the second round. Thank you.
So you can see there's a couple things that I wanted to point out. First of all, obviously Roger Federer is fluent in the English language. But how many times when we're meeting with a mixed audience, maybe from a different dialect background from us, maybe from a different technical background from us, and we use a phrase or we use a term or we use an acronym that we think is universally understood. It's just second nature for us. But in fact, our audience doesn't understand it. Not because they don't speak our language, not because they're not intelligent, but simply because it's a rather specified or rare kind of idiom in this case that people just aren't familiar with. So this is an important insight into audience analysis. So think as well, beyond how do you build credibility, always think about your audience and think about the kind of language that you choose to use in those situations. And if you have to use complex technical terms, for example, or you have to use acronyms, always define them the first time, either beforehand with some kind of pre-read that the audience can do, some kind of back deck that you have in your PowerPoint, if it's a PowerPoint, where you can just go over these terms with people so that they understand them. Because sometimes we'll speak and we just think that, of course, everyone would understand this. It probably didn't even cross the presenter's mind that absence makes the heart grow fonder wouldn't be understood by someone like Roger Federer, who clearly speaks very good English, but it wasn't. I then wanted to point out again, as a presenter or as a communicator, and Roger is at work in this situation. Wouldn't it be grand if we all went to work in the way that he did, with a adoring audience every time we spoke? But this is him at work. And you can see the credibility that he's able to build with his audience. He's very humble. He's very modest, even though the interviewers put him in a very difficult position because he's not understood a phrase. He keeps his cool. He maintains that appreciation for the audience and acknowledges them, talks about the weather and the rain, which of course the British audience always loves. So a really, really good example for me in those three pieces that I talked about in the beginning in terms of building credibility and presence through audience connection, through controlled enthusiasm, and in this case, because there's no sincerity. So a really, really good example of credibility and presence in motion. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to Meredith.
Hello.
To carry on the conversation.
Hi, I'm very pleased. Thank you so much for that, Matt. I'm also very pleased to tell everyone that we already have questions coming in, which is fantastic. Woo. So people should keep, and some of them are very good and quite specific, Matt, I warn you. But before we get to the questions, I want to ask you this very general kind of kickoff thing, which is, what do you think people get wrong when it comes to the issue of communicating at work? Like, what are the most common communication mistakes? Where are the problems happening?
I think often it comes down to planning and readiness. I think what people often make the mistake of doing is, and I include myself in this, we spend a lot of time preparing for those formal kind of communication events that, okay, I've got a presentation to, in my case, faculty board, where I'm going to be talking about a big change to the MBA program, for example. I'm going to spend hours and hours getting ready for that communication. And I think we sometimes define the significance of a communication event by the format rather than the impact that it has. So I could have a one-on-one informal conversation suddenly with the dean in the hallway, for example, which is really, really important. Or I may be called to go and talk to someone suddenly. And I don't think we think through the planning as much as we need to for those more informal communication events as we do the formal ones. And what do I mean by planning? So there's three things that I want people to always think about when you're going into any kind of significant communication event. First of all, have a clearly defined purpose, goal. That is, what do you want to get out of this communication? What's the call to action? What at the end of this conversation will be a good outcome for you? So that can help you to contextualize what you need to say. And that word contextualize is something else that I want people to keep in mind. Understand context. And this has become so difficult during the pandemic, where we haven't had those quote unquote water cooler conversations. We've been disconnected from each other as human beings. There's all kinds of contexts, internal within our organizations, as well as external. Wars going on, pandemics going on, inflationary pressures, interest rates going up, housing crisis, social justice, indigenous issues, whatever. These are the external contextual issues. And then there's internal issues that every organization deals with. Maybe it's budgetary pressures. Maybe it's you're going through a merger and acquisition, so your organization is changing significantly. And I think we don't spend enough time thinking about, okay, what's the broader context here that people are going to see or interpret my message through? And how can I incorporate that context into what I'm saying? The third thing is what I was talking about through the Roger Federer video, and that's just audience analysis. Just understand who your audience is as best as you can about, okay, how am I going to be best able to build a connection with this person and share information in a way that's going to resonate with them.
Right, but how do you, we've now got 26 questions, so we got to get to the questions, that's fantastic advice. But when you're, encountering the dean in the hallway or the CEO of your company, and you want to quickly take the opportunity to convey something important, I mean, how do you do all that? Have you prepared ahead of time to be able to encounter the dean in the hallway?
Yeah, well, I think part of it on the context side, absolutely. Like,
okay,
read those annual reports, as boring as they might be, and people rarely read them. Like, go on websites to organizations that you work for, certainly, and those that you're interacting with, and read about their strategic frameworks. Understand what their vision and mission is. Understand what makes them tick. So certainly context is an easy one. Read the news. Like, we all have an obligation to make sure that we understand what's going on in our local communities, and I think nationally and around the world as well. So that's easy. And then I think as well, in terms of, I mentioned earlier about not having transactional conversations. And there's, again, I keep coming back to this, but the pandemic has forced more and more of those upon us because we haven't been able to build relationships. But, do try to build relationships with people around you so that when you do run into that, in my case, it's the dean in the hallway, for example, that I feel that, okay, well, we know each other. We've had conversations before. And I would absolutely understand from a a homework point of view, the people that I work with who I know can impact and influence the future of the organization and the work that I do. I'd want to know what their backgrounds is, not as a way to, again, it has to be genuine. You don't want to come across as creepily lurking after someone and knowing,
Excuse me, let me consult the annual report.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But just familiarizing yourself. I think it's an easy thing to do. And so, yeah, I'd say that.
It strikes me that what you're saying is that being curious and open-minded is kind of a critical piece of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Because so much of communication is actually listening, right? Like we're not talking about the other side of communication. I'm talking about hopefully how to put a communication together so it's absorbed and people hear it. But I think good communicators as well, you really need to be a good listener. You need to understand how you process information, and you have to pay attention to what's going on around you. And curiosity, absolutely. Curiosity about people, curiosity about why things happen the way they do. I think it's just a healthy way to be. And I think it does improve our abilities as communicators when we develop those skills.
Right. Thanks, Matt. I'm going to turn to some of these questions. Some of them have to do with, so you've talked sort of about the informal hallway conversation, the larger scale presentation. What about the small meeting? So we've got someone who's asking, she's got her first performance review with her new manager. Tips on how to have an effective meeting. So in that case, we're talking about a very small meeting, but a pretty high stakes meeting.
Yeah, and that's anxiety inducing, right? And congratulations, you've got your first performance review. And that might be part of it. Like, is a bit of cognitive reframing. Like sometimes I think when we have a big communication event coming up, and in this case, this is absolutely a big deal. You're going in for your first performance review with a new boss. It's very easy to say, think all the negative things. Okay, what could go wrong? What hasn't she liked about the way that I've been working? What if I don't share all the information that I would like? And I think it's very easy to get ourselves into a negative mindset. And I'd encourage people to do a bit of cognitive reframing and flip that and be positive. Well, what an opportunity. I get to sit down with my supervisor for a half an hour and talk about me and all the amazing things that I've done and the areas in which that I can improve and continue to get better. And this is, again, an opportunity for listening and learning. So rather than something that needs to be feared, I would say that that's something that, first of all, there's a mindset, but let's go into that kind of situation positively. In terms of preparation for a meeting like that, I think, you'd want to have those pre-conversations with the supervisor beforehand just to understand, so how long typically do these meetings last? What kind of information can I bring to the meeting to ensure that you get the information out of it that you need? Just so you have a familiarity with what's going to happen. Certainly when I get invited to give talks outside of Smith at some kind of keynote or something somewhere, I'm really annoying to the people who are actually organizing the talk, like down to every detail. And for actually the people who are organizing the webinar today for me know this as well. I want to know everything about, okay, what's the audio setup? Oh, it's a boardroom. How many seats are around that boardroom table? Is there room for me to stand up? Is there a screen? How many people are going to be there? Oh, it's a mic. Is it a lapel mic or is it a handheld mic? I get all of this information because it allows me to be prepared and understand the situation that I'm going into so that when I get there, I can just concentrate, hopefully, on the communication itself rather than the details. So I'd encourage, great question. I'd encourage that person to, first of all, think positively about this. This is an awesome opportunity. I'm sure you're doing great at work and you're going to be able to talk about that with your boss. And then just make sure that you understand exactly how the flow of this meeting should go from your boss's perspective so that you can then prepare accordingly.
Nice. Also thinking about small meetings, and this is a particular question relating to board of director questions. So our executive team sounds defensive when responding to the board of director questions. Do you have tips on defending without sounding defensive?
Yeah, I think the first thing is acknowledging. I think when people attack us, if I can put it that way, or give us difficult questions, we feel our anxiety go up, right? It becomes like, oh my goodness. But I think you need to acknowledge, first of all, that clearly this is a really important issue to you. And so if I was answering a question like that, like I would say something like, clearly this is something that's really, really important to you. And I'm so glad that you brought it to my attention. I really want to talk, in order to talk about this, it would be helpful for me to understand exactly what it is that you're saying. So what I like to do then is I like to paraphrase the question back. So first of all, I'm going to acknowledge that this is something that's important to this person. So they're going to feel good that, yes, I understand as the person who's answering, this is something that you need answered. I'm now going to give you the credit to make sure that I am answering the question that you give me. And it's really easy to answer the wrong question when our anxiety's up, because we just start blurting things out. And now we're getting even worse, right? Because we're not even answering the question that we're given. So I like to paraphrase the question back to the person who's giving me a aggressive question. So it would be something like, so I just want to make sure that I'm answering your question correctly. So I think what you're asking me is the reasons behind us being 3 months behind on the rollout of this product, when 6 months ago we were a month ahead of schedule. And you'd like to know the specific reasons as to why we're behind. Is that the question that you're asking? So then the person gets a chance, first of all, you've acknowledged that this is important to them. They're feeling better. You've given them the credit to say, I want to make sure that I'm answering your question correctly. You're showing that you understand the question, and you're buying yourself some time, which is really, really important. So you're not just, again, blurting out an answer. By paraphrasing, your brain can go do two things at once. You're giving yourself time to think so you can formulate a better answer to that question.
That's a really good tip. Thank you. We've got a lot of really excellent questions here around the ins and outs of how, how do you develop confidence? How do you develop connection? How do you not speak too quickly? So I want to touch on some of them.
These are all great questions. Yeah.
So how do you develop a genuine connection with the audience when they don't know you? So it's one thing if it's your pals or your colleagues in the audience, but when they don't know you, how do you connect with them?
It's the worst. The worst part of any new presentation or new group that you're meeting with is that 30 seconds when you're starting talking to them and you've just got those blank faces in front of you staring back and there's no expressions, and it's really, really tricky. And I think particularly during virtual presentations.
Yeah, I was going to say even worse online when you can't see the audience and you're just talking to your computer in your office.
You can't read, exactly. So what I like to try to do is, when possible, I love to have, and I mentioned it before, a bit of small talk conversations before we get into the actual meat of things. So certainly if it's in person, that's easier, where I can work the room a little bit. I've got my tech set up. I'm now going to go around and introduce myself, say hello, talk about the warmish weather in Kingston, anything else that might be of interest, and develop a little bit of a connection that way, so that when we start the actual formal presentation, I feel that, okay, we already know each other fairly well. A lot of people will say, well, you just need to break the ice with a joke or humor. Again, for me, that seems sometimes like one of those attempts at non-genuine audience connection. It can fall flat. And I think it's really dangerous as well when you don't know the audience, because you might be telling a joke that, quite frankly, they don't find funny at all, or heaven forbid, may even find offensive. So always be careful with humor. My rule with humor, by the way, and I guess I'll mention this, is that if you're going to use humor for a new audience, self-deprecating humor. That's always safe. Anything, make a joke about yourself. Like,
as long as it doesn't, but it doesn't, like, doesn't it make you sound like you're not confident?
Well, I think it depends. I mean, again, it's not something that I would say do all the time, self-deprecating humor. But I think it depends. Like another video that I show a lot, actually, and she doesn't make a joke, but Indra Nooyi, the former CEO of PepsiCo, highly, highly successful leader, absolutely transformed that company. And at one point during the little talk that I show, she talks about the fact that she failed a course during business school. And you might say, to your point, Meredith, that why would you share that? Because that now you're losing credibility with the audience. But in this case, it's Indra Nooyi. Everyone knows that she's been an incredibly successful person.
Right.
And she's not using humor, but she is sort of self-deprecating and saying, listen, I'm not just some perfect kind of business leader. I've had failures too.
Well, that's the genuine piece, I suppose.
That's the genuine
really sharing
piece,
something
right.
of herself.
Yeah. And I think it's always good to err on the side of, and this is a bit nondescript perhaps, of being human. So right. Yeah, you can tell a joke and it's self-deprecating. And if people think that now makes you come across as being less confident or less competent, well, hopefully you put together a really awesome presentation to the rest. And that's going to be very clear that that's not the case, that you're just a human being. And that's another important tip I want to give people when you're going into these high stakes presentations. Remember, it's just a conversation. Like how many people do we have on this right now? 733 people, it says in my Zoom. So I'm talking to 733 people right now. I can see one person. I can see Meredith.
Hey.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, Meredith, and everyone else. But it's really easy to think in these situations that, oh my goodness, how can I do this? I'm speaking in front of 733 people. But I do this every day. I have conversations at breakfast with my kids around the breakfast table. I walk out and I talk to people in the hallways when I'm here at Goods Hall at the School of Business. So you're all effective communicators. You wouldn't have gotten to be signed up for this webinar if you weren't someone who knows how to communicate one-on-one. So try to bring that one-on-one personality, that authentic personality that you are when you're just sitting across the breakfast table, different topics, obviously. But that's who I want people to try to be, not try to be someone else. I think that's where we put pressure on ourselves.
Except I think we put pressure on ourselves because we feel more judgment. I mean, sure, your teen kids could be judging you. That's fair because you're their parent. However, the stakes are higher when it's, for example, our first question about a performance review. I mean, that's not a one-on-one conversation because there's a power imbalance. How do you kind of deal with it? I mean, I suppose it's still great to be able to treat it like it's a one-on-one breakfast conversation, but it isn't.
No, it's not. And what I mean, the preparation is different and things like register is different. I mean, I talk a lot about register in my course. So that's the kind of language that you use. Like we code switch all the time, which means we switch from informal language we might use with our friends to very formal language that when we're speaking to our boss, for example. So we're used to code switching. So I think when we're in those situations where we're trying to prepare for these kinds of conversations, it's just a matter of, we're not being informal, we're still being formal, but we're not masking our true selves. We're still being ourselves. We're prepared, we've got great data, we've got a fantastic presentation with amazing content flow and controlling idea that just goes through that presentation, a really clear call to action, all those kinds of things that I talk about in my course, but we're still delivering it in an authentic way where we're being still ourselves. And I think that reduces the pressure. And that might bring me back to another point you mentioned, Meredith, and I'm sure other people have asked about this as well. Some of those pragmatics around, I speak too quickly. How do I stop doing that?
We've got someone. How do you slow down the pace of talking?
Yeah, how do I, I use too many filler words. I say, kind of.
I talk with my hands all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Webinars.
Me too on webinars. And that's exactly, it's something that I need to control as well.
Like what's the best way to practice this stuff, to manage this stuff?
Exactly. So here's the thing, and this goes back to what I'm talking about being authentic. Practice it in your everyday conversation. You don't have a presentation self and yourself all the rest of the time. So if you're someone who uses too many filler words or speaks too quickly.
And to be clear, a filler word is like,
sort of, it could even be words like essentially. Some of us have little pet words that we just like to use, but the typical ones are those kind of, sort of, I'm an person. So for me, I have to work on and the goal is not to eliminate these, by the way. It's okay that we use an or a, or a sort of every once in a while. But we need to manage them if we're saying them too much. So if you record yourself, and I strongly encourage people, as painful as it might be, to capture yourself on video and watch yourself to understand if your hands get in the way when you're doing webinars, for example, or if you use too many filler words, if your pace is too quickly or is too quick, you then know what you need to work on. So how do you work on it? You work on it in your everyday life. So if I know that I'm a fast talker that uses too much, I'm going to work on that in my everyday conversation. Getting rid of filler words is actually pretty easy, believe it or not, when you learn how to pause. So just like I did there. So that
was good.
Yeah, exactly. Rather than
heard that.
Yeah, those are the places where we're going to put those or those kind ofs. It's when we're transitioning from thought to thought. Learn to pause. Gives your audience some time to absorb what you're saying, gives you time to capture your thoughts, and it will eliminate those filler words and slow you down. Those go together, by the way, almost always. If you're a fast talker, you probably have some filler words in there too. But don't sweat it. If you've got some filler words, it's okay. It's just if you've got too many that they're inhibiting the audience's belief in you.
I think when people don't use any filler words, those people who, I've heard people memorize speeches and then they deliver these robotic speeches that have no filler words and also don't have any natural communication flow. So you don't want that either, right?
No, exactly. And I'm a big believer in non-scripted presentations. So if we're going to talk about presentations rather than just communication, I think scripted presentations are really, really difficult to deliver. If you happen to be a highly trained, successful actor, you can probably pull it off. I'm not, and I really struggle if I have to memorize a speech. I actually learned this lesson when I was 9 years old. So I grew up in Ontario. We had to memorize speeches and give them in front of the school. So in grade 5, I won my class competition. And so I got to go and speak in front of the whole school of, I don't know, 300 people or something. So I got up on stage and I was talking about the Titanic. And yes, I'm old enough that this is long before the movie came out with Leo and Kate. And so anyways,
but not right after it happened.
No,
okay.
Somewhere in between, exactly. Right. So I'm up there doing my speech. I'd practiced it. I'd probably said it, I don't know, 50 times over the 2 weeks that I've been working on it in front of my family and whatever. And so I get up there and about 30 seconds in, I forgot what was next and I froze and I did not know what to say next. And these were the days when teachers just let you sort of hang out there and suffer for a while. No one was coming to my rescue. So I got quite emotional and upset as a kid because I was in this situation. I'm fine now. Obviously, I've gone on to do the career that I do now. I learned a lot from it. But I think the danger with scripted presentations is that not only are you wooden, it takes away all flexibility. Because we also know that in typical business presentations, you don't stand up and give a presentation for 15 or 20 minutes or half an hour. You're going to get interrupted because it's a conversation. So you've got your deck together, but the CEO or whoever you're speaking to is going to be interrupting you and saying, oh, just wait a minute, what about this? Or can you go back there? Because I'm not sure what you're saying about X. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. If we're scripted, we've completely taken away any kind of flexibility. And again, that ability to have a real conversation with the audience in front of us. Still have a great deck that now I can jump around and use as I need to as we go through the conversation rather than just being a linear flow.
Okay, but wait, there's a few issues there that I think our audience is thinking, okay, yeah, wait, a person who's really insecure and nervous is maybe going to feel a little more secure if they're holding their script in front of them. The other thing is what I know, and I'm a person who usually ad libs, but the tendency when you're not scripted is that you run on, you go longer. You went longer than 10 minutes, just to be clear.
Absolutely.
So, and that's very normal, right? As soon as you're not sticking to a script because you add things and you think of things and, so how do you recommend people prepare?
So the first thing that you can do, I've got notes here. I've got notes here for this conversation that we're having. They're in front of me. So when I say don't script, I'm not saying don't have notes in front of you, especially if you've got a complex or technical presentation that you're giving. If you need to go and check notes during the conversation, absolutely. People would expect and understand that. You might even need to pause in the middle of your presentation and say, just 1 minute. I just want to make sure that I'm covering everything. Just let me consult my notes. There's nothing wrong with doing that. So when I say extemporaneous or unscripted, I'm not talking about being unprepared, and I'm not talking about just going in and freewheeling it and seeing what happens. You need to have notes, and you need to have really well-designed slides if it's a slide-supported presentation, so that you're going to make sure that you're getting through it well. The other thing that you can do to stop that ramble situation that you mentioned, Meredith, is check in with your audience. Is actually remind yourself to ask them, say, is there anything else that I can cover on this? I can certainly share more information, or would you like me to stop there? Just so that you're giving, again, the audience control over the flow rather than you just going on. So learning how to check in with your audience, I think, is important too.
Oh, that's fantastic. Okay, I have to speak at a memorial this weekend. And I have
that.
5 minutes. Well, anyway, I have 5 minutes. It's going to be a big crowd. So I've been thinking myself about how does one speak and tell stories and not sound wooden and keep it to 5 minutes. So this is, relevant just outside of work as well. I'm going to switch tones here, to switch tracks here to, I think, a really important question, which is what is important when you're dealing with a remote? So you talked about the challenges of communicating with a virtual audience, but what about when that audience is multicultural and multilingual?
Yeah, it's more difficult, right? I mean, when you've got an audience of any mixed audience in terms of background, demographics, role, function, industry, or multicultural, it makes it much, much more difficult. So I think the first thing, when you're speaking to anyone who has a different dialect than you, it's not even a language issue, is first of all, remember the Roger Federer, absence makes the heart grow fonder. So if you have a tendency to use a lot of idiomatic language or difficult metaphors, for example, if that's just the way that you naturally speak, you might want to just make sure that you're monitoring that as you're going into an audience that has a different culture than you. I am married to someone who is from Britain. She grew up speaking English. I grew up speaking English. We have been married for almost 20 years, and there are still phrases and idioms that she will say, those of you who've watched Ted Lasso, you probably picked up on this, that I don't understand. Most of them I know. I know most British expressions now, but there's still the odd one that comes up that I don't know. So when you've got these mixed audiences in front of you, I think the first thing is to understand we need to simplify our language. And that doesn't mean, again, it's not dumbing down because people can't understand, but we all come from our own language heritage, where we use a lot of like hockey references, for example, or baseball references if you grew up in North America. Something's out of left field. Well, they don't say that if you're not in North America. That doesn't mean anything to someone. It's not a phrase that they use. In Britain, they use a lot of British expressions or cricket expressions, like I was knocked for 6. That's a cricket expression, which means I was surprised by something. We don't use that here. So first of all, check that are you using that kind of language? And then I think the next thing that you want to do is back to this check-in. So if you have a mixed audience, I think you really want to take your time. You want to have well-supported presentation. So maybe it means a little bit more pre-read. So you're giving people information before. You might have a richer back deck, so an appendix if you're using a slide presentation with additional information that you can go to if you need to. And there might be a post communication submission that you're giving out as well, some kind of email or summary of things just to keep people together. And then during the meeting, check in. Check in with your audience regularly. Is everyone okay with what I've said so far? Are there any questions? Is there anything that I can clarify? So people feel comfortable stopping you and saying, okay, I just wasn't sure about what you said about X. Can you talk about that again, for example? So those would be a couple tips.
Right. Okay. So you're really an advocate for the not waiting until the end for the questions. Really get them in there. Checking.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. And I think ultimately that should come down to the audience's choice. I mean,
Right.
There's a way that we all like to do it, right? Absolutely. But if you're going to serve your audience, and I think especially if you're asking the audience to do something, you're trying to persuade them to do something, you've got to give power over to them. So if they want to interrupt you throughout your presentation, well, that's what you're going to have to live with. And you're going to have to learn how to give clear and concise answers to those questions and still get through your content in the way that you need to.
Right. What about the opposite problem? We've got a question here about the problem, especially this is acute in COVID times where we're virtual all the time, when you lose your audience. I mean, how many of you watching today are actually multitasking and not giving us your full attention? And how often does that happen? And what can a presenter or a communicator do about that? And that could be, I mean, I've seen people with phones under the table in meetings, you know?
Yeah.
Like we're up against so many distractions these days. How do you keep your audience with you?
Yeah, I talk about these, they're called signal techniques, and there's different ways you can try to bring your audience back. And first of all, I think it's really important to acknowledge that we all do this. So don't blame your audience or don't feel that you're giving a really bad presentation. We all do it. It's okay. So first of all, don't feel badly about it. Don't think that you're failing or think that the person is disrespecting you. I think especially during the pandemic, as you said, as people were balancing childcare and other things in the house and cats coming through windows like I had, there were times when we all got distracted. But I think with signal techniques, what we do is we bring the audience back at those key points in the communication where we really need to make sure that they're paying attention. So here's a couple signal techniques just for an example. The first thing you can do is really just tell the audience you're going to say something important. So something like, so the one thing that I would like you to remember from today's presentation is it is so important to just be your authentic self when you're presenting. Try to aim for that.
All of you who are writing emails right now just stopped and tuned in, didn't you?
Yeah. So actually telling people that this is a really important point that you're about to deliver so that hopefully their eyes peek up a little bit. You saw that I stepped forward a little bit too. Even though I'm virtual, I just changed my body position. Obviously in a real life room, that's easier to do. You can use the room in a more effective way. Just changing the focus can be another thing. So, okay, we're going to switch from me talking now to showing a video, for example, or I'm going to show you an Excel spreadsheet or whatever it might be, just to change that focus. So that's going to grab the audience's attention for a little bit as well. We know that analogies work really well and metaphors, obviously storytelling. We could do a whole session on storytelling. Stories tend to really capture people's attention if told well and they have a business purpose. Don't just tell a story because you've heard that audiences love stories. Yes, we do, but we're at work. So they've got to have a business purpose, or otherwise they're great for a Friday night when you're going to the movies, but they're not so great when you're at work.
Got it. Okay. I've got a few questions here from people who are dealing with an audience who's resistant to their ideas. You touched on this earlier in the case of the board, but like, what about a one-on-one where you're trying to talk to someone who's completely closed-minded or resistant? How do you find, someone says, how do you find a middle ground to continue the conversation so that all is not lost?
Yeah, it's really tricky. And sometimes, to be honest, all is lost. Like sometimes you are going to be talking to someone and it really doesn't matter like how strong of a communicator you are or how strong the case is that you're making, you're just going to meet with resistance. And I think it's important that we recognize that sometimes that's just going to happen. But some tips that I would give around this, again, goes back to preparation and around audience analysis. And this is where we need to do our very best to understand who our audience is, how they like to receive information, and what their decision-making style is. So some people are very data driven. I work in a business school. A lot of people here are very analytical and very data driven. So if I'm giving some kind of recommendation at faculty board, which is our governmental kind of organization or meeting where we make big changes to things happening at the business school, I know that I'm going to have to support my recommendations with data and with good data, because a lot of people in the room are going to like that. Other people are going to be influenced by not being the first mover. That is, they're going to want to see proof of concept. So can you bring examples of where this has worked elsewhere to demonstrate that, okay, this is possible, what I'm talking to you about, and we can get there. Look at what happened here. Then by decision-making style, it's important to understand how this person likes to make decisions. So are they someone who makes decisions, again, is it based on data? Are they very much an intuition-driven decider? Donald Trump often talked about he made decisions with his gut. I can only imagine what it would have been like trying to convince Donald Trump of certain things, but knowing that, okay, he's an intuition-driven decider, you're not going to go in there with a bunch of data to someone like him, because it's just going to fall on deaf ears. He's probably going to throw you out of the office. So understanding how the person processes information or prefers to process information and how they make decisions are two things that I would want to look at when you're in this situation where, okay, I'm working with someone who's being defiant against my ideas. Like, can you present the information in a different way? In the moment, it's hard. In the moment, it's hard.
Oh yeah, because it's hard not to take that personally.
Yeah.
Okay, here's a question. Matt, with organizational resilience and business processes changing quickly, what is your opinion as to how much an organization should put into continuing education, moreover in the area of communicating in business and mentoring? Is this training that we should all be getting?
Well, I'm obviously incredibly biased on this, and thanks for the question. Yeah, I mean, this is important. I didn't get any training like this early in my career on how to effectively present my ideas. This became an area of interest for me, and so I did my own work and research on it. But this is an area that's so important. There's a study that came out, I think it was in 2016, out of the US, and it said that the average organization in the United States have 100 employees, spent on average 17 hours a week clarifying communication. 17 hours a week clarifying communication. And that translated to about $500,000 a year. So 1,000-person company, do the math, it's a lot of money. And we know this is true, because how many times have we been on an email thread that's been going on for a couple of days and different people have now been brought in and you're thinking, I don't even know what this is anymore. I don't know what anyone can say. Or you walk out of a meeting and you look at the person beside you and say, do you know what was that all about? Like, what are we supposed to do now? I'm not even sure. So we know that communication suffers in organization, and it's gotten worse, I would say, during the pandemic. And communication training specifically, I think another reason that's really important is that we've grown up with a generation of people now who are used to communicating virtually and remotely over their phones. And it's really anxiety inducing for them to have these kinds of face-to-face conversations, be they in a room or even a conversation like this online, can be really, really challenging. So I think that there's also a generational divide, and for us to be making sure that we're really driving this training out and that we're all understanding how we can become better communicators, because it saves organizations money, it improves efficiency, and then ultimately it's going to give people give them more confidence at work and they'll be more productive.
Well, you just made a case. That was good. In fact, that question of email chains, we do have a few questions related to written communications and the challenge of email, the challenge of written communications. How do these points that you've made around speaking and engaging with audiences and stuff, how does that stuff translate into written communication? Maybe particularly email.
Yeah, for the most part, quite well. I mean, stuff around purpose, what exactly you're trying to achieve. Like, think about your subject lines in your emails. Don't just put idea, for example, as your subject line. Like, you use many words in your subject line so that people know exactly. It's a headline, like a headline when you're clicking on your favorite, news organization website. There's a headline that's trying to get you to click right on that story. Well, your email should be the same. So I think we sometimes feel that we need to limit the number of words that we use in email subject headers. And yes, I'm not advocating for 100-word subject line, but use 10, use 15 if you need to, in order to make sure that the audience knows exactly what follows. In terms of content, I'm a big believer in using bullets in email, just to show what the key points are, to break things up rather than having long multi-paragraph kind of emails. I think those are probably best. If you have multiple paragraphs in that way, it's probably not an email. It's probably a meeting or a memo that you need to send out rather than an email. And then the ideas that I shared around purpose, audience, and context, exactly the same. You go through the same process. What exactly am I trying to achieve here? What do I want people to do on the other end of this email when they receive it? Who are they? So what's the best way for me to communicate with this particular audience? And are there any contextual issues that I need to think about as I put this email together?
Oh, wow. I think that's really great advice, because as somebody writes, how do you capture people's attention and make sure the key points are understood without being too bullet pointy?
Yeah. And not all bullets. Like go ahead and write that introductory paragraph, and then, but bold bullets, that kind of thing, without shouting at people. I'm not, we could spend a lot of time speaking about written communication. There is an art to it, and I completely understand what this person's saying. It's very easy to come across as shouty in an email or as pushy in an email. The tone can get wrong. So it's probably hard to explain exactly what I mean in terms of using bullets effectively, but I completely take the point. It's not a list of bullets, but I do use them in emails.
Okay, but it's true. I mean, as that person points out, like it's the same issue. It's really hard to keep people's attention. People skim now in ways that they didn't used to. I mean, I can barely get through a newspaper article these days. Just looking for the key points. Go, 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 go.
Yeah, and that just points to as well, I think, just for organizational internal communications generally, we know that you need to use multiple channels. Like for almost any communication of any kind of import, it's not going to be just one communication. Oh, good, that's done. Now everyone's on the same page and we're good. Right. You have to use multiple channels.
Right. Okay. We are almost out of time, and the questions just keep flowing in. We have not really touched on the topic of PowerPoint slides. I know we weren't going to get too much into that. I do really want to ask this one question, which is, what is the best way to set up presentation content? Are images and aesthetics really important, or is simplicity more effective?
I've never thought of that as an either or before.
Yeah.
Images versus simplicity. I am a big believer in simplicity, absolutely, but that doesn't mean not having detail. So I'm a big advocate. I talked about backdeck and appendix before. So I think your PowerPoint slides need to get to the point as quickly as they possibly can. Really strong headline, back to this. A strong visual to support whatever that headline is, if appropriate. Maybe it's a chart that you're including, something like that, and then something to focus the audience so they know what the key information is that they're drawing out of it. But that back deck is where I'm going to have all the detail. And maybe I'm even going to link to an Excel spreadsheet, for example.
Okay.
Never put an Excel spreadsheet in your PowerPoint deck. Yes,
no.
Exactly. We think we've all seen that before. Doesn't mean you don't have an Excel available. If you need to illustrate something, or you get a question where someone wants, show me the math on that. What do you mean that we're going to get to $500,000 in 3 months? Like, how does that work? Yeah, okay, I'll show you on the spreadsheet the model that we built. Here's how we'll get there. Yeah, those would be a couple of things I'd say.
Okay. Oh, wow. I bet we could spend a whole hour doing PowerPoint slides. My pet peeve is when people write so much on the slides and I just read, and I stop listening to them.
Well, can I give a plug to a friend and colleague who I've worked with for a long time?
Sure.
A guy named Dave Parody, who is a PowerPoint expert and an Excel charting expert as well. He operates a company called thinkoutsidetheslide.com. I've had him as a guest speaker in many of my courses over the years. And he is the PowerPoint guy. And he's got lots of free resources on his website. So
say that URL again, please.
thinkoutsidetheslide.com.
Okay, thinkoutsidetheslide.com. Everybody got that? 2 minutes to go. I want to point out Zoe Robinson has sent us this tip, which is using bluff for email correspondence. Bottom line up front. Have you heard of that?
Oh, yes.
Bluff.
Oh, I love it, Zoe. I call it answer first. Same concept. Exactly. I've never heard it called bluff before, but absolutely. Like, get to the solution first. Like, get to the main kind of takeaway upfront. Direct communication. Couldn't agree more. And that's, for me, not just for email communication. For most communication, that's the way to go. Okay. You want to hook your audience, tell them what they're going to get out of this meeting or presentation as soon as you can. Then you'll get them, oh, I'm paying attention now because I can see this is important to me. Great advice, Zoe. Thank you for that.
Okay. You know what? We're 1 minute to the end. Everybody, the 58 of you who still have open questions, I'm really sorry I didn't get to all of them specifically. However, lots of them were repeated questions. So I hope that most of you got kind of the gist of what you need out of your questions, out of your answers. I also just want to point out that Deborah just wrote to say, Matt, thanks for having the he, him in your name. Provides a notice of inclusivity and genuine welcome to all, especially with a 700 diverse member audience. So forgive me, Deborah, that I don't have that, but I'll add it. So just before we close, I want to make a couple of plugs for some of our programs, which Matt, in fact, you are involved in. We always tell the audience about our Queen's Exec education programs, but this one in particular is one that Matt, you are hosting this fall. Do you want to make a plug for it? Quick.
Yeah. So a lot of the concepts we talked about today, this is over 14 hours, picture them stretched out and some other information as well. I designed this, or first offered it 2 years ago. I'm always constantly refining it. I love doing it. I get people from all different kinds of functions and roles. I truly learn as much from the people that I'm working with as the people who come to the session. So please, if you're interested in continuing to work on your communication skills, I'd love to see you at one of my next upcoming sessions.
So for more information, people can visit smithqueens.com/execed. There is information about this program along with all of the other offerings from Queen's Executive Education. In terms of our next free webinar, the next one is Understanding and Leading Hybrid Teams, and that's on May 19th. Anyone who's registered for this webinar will get information about our next one. So again, keep your eyes on your inbox. You will be getting a recording of today's presentation. I hope you will feel free to share that with your colleagues. Matt, it's been such a pleasure having you with us today, and you've got just fantastic insights. We easily could have got another hour. I do want to point out that this webinar has received the most registrations out of any webinar Smith School of Business has ever offered. So clearly it's a hot topic, and I know that there's appetite for learning more about this stuff. So maybe we can revisit in another month or down the road.
Well, thanks so much, Meredith, and thanks to the audience. It's been great fun. I've delighted in your participation throughout and in answering the questions. And look me up on LinkedIn if you want to talk more. I'd love to meet you. So take care of everyone, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks again, everyone. Have a good afternoon. Bye.